Big government has to get bigger to survive. And it has to take over every aspect that challenges its illegitimate authority.
Every school child knows there are three branches of government. It was one of the great wonders of our founding fathers to have that checks and balances.
President Biden isn't just overdoing executive orders. He's gone right off the pier.
Throughout history, for all its faults in delivering freedom for all, the United States has enjoyed unparalleled levels of liberty, precisely by dividing powers.
When you look at world history, and I've researched all of 6,000 years of recorded human history, we see a theme that the most common form of government is a king, that power wants to concentrate into the hands of one person, whether we call them a Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, or Czar. Now, after every crisis, there is this trend: surrender more of your rights and freedoms to the government. They'll take care of everything. The problem is we're fundamentally transforming our form of government from the people ruling themselves back ultimately to a king.
But America has enjoyed unparalleled freedom by separating government powers. James Madison, a key architect of the Constitution, noted that putting all the power in the hands of one person or a few is the very definition of tyranny, and it goes against what the Bible teaches about the nature of man.
And we have to work aggressively to shrink this size of the state and this philosophy and ideology of statism, and move us back to being one nation under God, in which we have the freedom to exercise our religion. Because the future of our country, as Ronald Reagan said, if we ever cease to be one nation under God, we will be a nation gone under.
There is a big issue with executive overreach in our day. We have a system of government where under the Constitution we have three separate branches. And the legislative branch is supposed to make the laws, the executive branch is supposed to enforce them, the judicial branch is supposed to interpret them.
But too often in recent decades, there's been a dangerous concentration of power in one branch.
Right now we've got the executive branch actually making most of our laws, and doing so to the detriment of the American people, locking them out of the process.
Because our founding fathers believed that too much power in the executive, too much power in the legislative body, too much power in the judiciary was too much power to any one branch. And so they designed a system that pushed the power downward and outward because they feared centralization of power and they feared the consolidation of power.
The Constitution allows for presidents to exercise certain executive powers, and all presidents have issued executive orders. But these orders are tools for carrying out a president's responsibilities, not for assuming the power of other branches. President Biden signed more executive orders in his first few weeks than any previous president in history.
President Biden has unleashed more tthan 40 executive orders before 100 days were up in his administration. He's definitely trying to govern by executive order. He doesn't even want to wait for Congress, which his party controls, both branches. And yet he's been signing these executive orders as fast as he can, perhaps hoping the American people won't notice.
Do you think it's ironic that the New York Times, which is no bastion of conservatism, even said, hey, Joe, you better ease up on these executive orders?
Both the New York Times and the Washington Post, which are firmly in the Biden camp, have warned President Biden to slow down. I think they're afraid that the American people will wake up and say, my goodness, we thought we had a democratic republic with self-government, and now we're being ruled by a king who uses his pen to issue edicts right and left.
Bob Knight gives example after example of recent executive orders by President Biden.
One of President Biden's first executive orders undid the Mexico City policy. That's the rule by which the government can't fund abortions overseas using taxpayer dollars. He did away with it his first week in office. This is a horrendous thing for a so-called devout Catholic to do, to try to expand abortion throughout the world. I can't get my head around that one. Another thing he did was to impose a transgender and sexual orientation agenda on the nation's schools. This means lifting the bar on males entering locker rooms, restrooms, and being on women's and girls' sports teams.
On the way to a track meet in New York City, Alana and I were talking about what her strategy was going to be for the day. And she looked at me and said, "Mom, it really doesn't matter because I'm running against the boys today. I won't win."
And it doesn't stop there.
Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline that killed thousands of jobs and made us more dependent on foreign oil, just when America had achieved energy independence. This makes no sense at all unless you're a climate extremist, and his administration appears to be populated with just those folks. In fact, they're using climate as a way to impose more and more government and more restrictions on what Americans can do. Perhaps the most destructive thing Joe Biden has done is reverse President Trump's sensible policies at the border, where he was restoring order, he was reducing illegal immigration. Under Biden, we have catch and release again, where if you make it into the U.S., you can just be released. And often people don't come back for their court date. In March alone, more than 170,000 people were caught trying to cross the border. And this is just the ones who were caught, so we know many more have tried. We're looking at a situation where as many as 1 million people may be entering the U.S. illegally this year alone because of President Biden's executive orders reversing sensible border policy. He stopped building the wall on the border, which was controversial at first and became very popular when people realized we needed that kind of protection to secure our border.
Do you think that President Biden is abusing presidential powers?
I think President Biden is abusing the executive office in many ways. And, you know, it's kind of funny because the people who supported President Biden in the press would always talk about the imperial presidency. They railed against President Trump whenever he issued an executive order. And here's Biden issuing more than Trump and his predecessor, Obama, combined in his first 100 days. This is an abuse of power. We saw what happens to nations that just have kings who can abuse their power. That's why America's founders went to so much trouble to divide the powers. And their idea was to put most of the power in the hands of the group closest to the people, which was the legislature, and in particular, the House of Representatives, who have to face the voters every 2 years. Increasingly, in recent years, presidents have tried to run around that power in the House and create their own agenda through executive orders, but we've never seen anything like this. Joe Biden has left them all in the dust, and there has to be an effective resistance here, or we're going to end up with a de facto kingship instead of a presidency, something we don't want in America.